This reading is from Part 1, Southern Roots, Chapter 3, The Pursuit of Education, and I'm starting on page 33. The Smiths' joint incomes allowed them the opportunity in 1899 to move into a very fashionable neighborhood, where they purchased a large Victorian home at 2100 Broadway on an elegant tree-lined street. The house, carpeted throughout, had at least 3 bedrooms with walnut and oak furniture, a kitchen, a dining room with a china closet, a sewing room with 2 sewing machines, a singer, and a Wheeler and Wilson. The parlor was elegantly furnished with walnut furniture, marble tables, and an Ivers and Pond piano that Mrs. Smith, who was a well-trained pianist, used to entertain her family and friends, playing hymns and her favorite parlor music. As in their former home, the room was adorned with art, including some of Dr. Smith's paintings. The family's income afforded them luxuries not commonly found in black homes at the turn of the century, including an extensive library. The room was comfortably furnished with a 3-piece leather set, which made reading there most enjoyable. There was no public library for Negroes in Little Rock, so Beatrice, who had a passion for reading, spent much of her time in her father's favorite room. There she could read the works of Shakespeare and other great literary works that her father avidly collected. Beatrice also loved to read her father's medical books and journals. She even contemplated a career in medicine at one time, but the obstacles in pursuing a formal medical career were difficult for women and nearly insurmountable for black women. While still a young girl, Florence Beatrice could barely imagine a black female physician. Although Beatrice abandoned any hope of a medical career, she maintained an interest in medicine all of her life. In 1948, she could share vicariously in the achievement of Edith Irby Jones of Hot Springs, when she became the first black woman to be admitted to a Southern all-white medical program at the University of Arkansas. Price wrote to Dr. H. Clay Chennault, supervisor of medical education and hospitals, commending the university for its bold actions. Chennault's comments, quoted in the Chicago Tribune, that most struck her was that Jones will be a part of her class just like any other member. On a sweltering Chicago summer's day, August 26, 1948, she copied those precious words into her diary. But in the 1890s, this could have been only a dream. It is ironic that Beatrice cast aside her interest in the medical field, but ultimately had a formidable career as a composer. The field of serious musical composition was almost wholly dominated by men at the turn of the century. At the time she completed high school in 1902, only 3 American women composers had succeeded in having their large-scale classical works performed by major orchestras: Margaret Ruthven Lang, Helen Hopkirk, and Amy Cheney Beach. And it is very unlikely that Florence Beatrice had heard any of their orchestral music. Beatrice could not have known, but she would break racial and gender barriers for African American women composers. It was through her mother that Florence Beatrice was exposed to music as a child, and from whom she took her first piano lessons. Proud of her daughter and wanting to encourage her interest in music, Mrs. Smith presented Beatrice in a recital when she was just 4 years old. The occasion was a visit to the Smith home by the distinguished black concert pianist John Boone and his wife. Boone, known as Blind Boone, was enthusiastic about the young child's first public performance. In turn, Boone played for her and her parents. Perhaps he played some Beethoven or Liszt, or dazzled the Smiths with the typical 19th century virtuoso renditions of opera transcriptions and cyclone imitations for which he was so well known throughout the United States and Europe. Florence Beatrice and Blind Boone maintained a friendship for many years, and Boone performed for her again when she joined the faculty of Clark University in Atlanta in 1910. Although Beatrice showed an unmistakable gift for piano playing, she showed an equal interest in composing. She worked diligently at her craft, although it is not known if she studied composition formally. By the time she was 11, Beatrice sold her first composition to a publisher. Investigation has not revealed the piece. Perhaps it was for a local publisher whose catalog no longer exists. Beatrice attended Union School, a combined elementary and high school for black children. William Grant Still, 8 years her junior, also attended Union School. Though they were educated in a segregated school that did not have the same facilities as the white elementary schools, Price and Still were fortunate to have been taught by Charlotte Andrews Stevens, one of the most remarkable teachers in Little Rock's history. In spite of the fact that Mrs. Stevens' salary was meager and her earnings were substantially lower than those of white teachers, she dedicated herself for 70 years to teaching Little Rock's black children. Charlotte Stevens, Dr. Smith, and other community leaders were actively involved in efforts to support the education of black children, to establish schools, and to improve the conditions under which black children were educated. They felt strongly that education was the means by which Negroes would become independent and responsible citizens. James D. Anderson, in The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935, explained that ex-slave communities pursued their education objectives by developing various strata, but the one they stressed the most was leadership training. They believed that the masses could not achieve political and economic independence or self-determination without first becoming organized, and organization was impossible without well-trained intellectuals, teachers, ministers, politicians, managers, administrators, and businessmen. There was much work to be done if black children were to be prepared to enter the workforce. At the time Price attended elementary school, the system of education for blacks in the South was still dismal. In 1900, almost half of the Negro population in Arkansas was still illiterate. That year, 146,880 black students were registered for school, but only 90,437 attended. In contrast, 370,553 white students were enrolled, and 249,105, more than two-thirds, attended. The school year was significantly shorter for black students. On the average, they went to school 20 days fewer than white students. The state appropriated far less money for each black child. On average, $2.13 was spent for each black child in 1900. More than twice that amount, $5.14, was allocated for each white child. The building values were equally reflective of the situation. In 1900, the value of the black schools was $335,527, but the white schools were valued at 9 times that amount, or $3,029,763. Black teachers who dedicated their lives to teaching were compensated at levels far below their white colleagues. For example, in 1916, white teachers in Arkansas were still paid almost 3 times as much as black teachers. The per-student state appropriation for paying white teachers was $12.95, while black teachers earned only $4.59 per pupil. Little Rock's educational system was slightly better for black children than in many cities in the South. An informal system of education for blacks began in Little Rock when Reverend William Wallace Andrews, Charlotte Stevens' father, opened a private school in 1863. Born a slave to Marion Chester Ashley, a lawyer, Andrews was brought to Little Rock in 1821 at the age of 4 with his mother, who was Mrs. Ashley's maid. He described Little Rock then as a pathless wilderness on the Arkansas River, about which the rest of the country was entirely ignorant. Even though it was essentially forbidden, he was taught to read and write by Mrs. Ashley, who felt herself to be above both law and custom. He was also permitted access to the Ashleys' vast library, which was supplied with reading matter of all sorts. Andrews, who lived with cultured people, was provided with the tools of literacy. Surrounded by books, he proceeded to educate himself and then share his acquired knowledge with the other slaves in the Ashley manor. After Andrews married Caroline Williams, a slave on a nearby plantation, in 1848, he continued to provide education for other Negroes, including his wife, who could neither read nor write, even at risk of punishment of himself and his pupils if the laws had been enforced against them. He explained to the group, "It will be safer if we kneel down. Nobody is going to interrupt a group of people who are praying." And with the slaves on their knees, facing their chairs, he began their lessons. The Ashleys furnished Andrews and his wife with a home where he provided religious instruction and training in reading and writing. Finally, in 1854, the year their daughter Charlotte was born, the Ashleys gave the black Methodists land on which to build a church. In 1863, when Little Rock was captured by Union troops, blacks seized the opportunity to incorporate a school within the church house. Wallace Andrews and an assistant organized the school, the first school for black children in Arkansas. After a few months, this modest school was relinquished to the Congregationalists of the American Missionary Society, who were sent from the north to take over the school Andrews had started. They brought with them graded textbooks and slates upon which each child could write. After the Civil War, blacks in Little Rock were quick to recognize the need for education. Education was one of the determining factors in establishing one's status in the black community and the best means to economic advancement. The federal government spent millions of dollars on education for Negroes, but blacks whose passion for learning could no longer be denied were impatient. With this recognition, they began to build their own schools and pay for their own teachers. An educational association was formed to raise money, pay teachers' salaries, and manage the private segregated schools. These self-help efforts and acts of determination were the foundation for building a public school system to educate Little Rock's black children. Through the combined efforts of the private support from Negro citizens, the Freedmen's Bureau, the government agency established to support education for Negroes, and the Society of Friends, Union School, the first public school for Negroes in Little Rock, was established in October 1867. The two-story school, which had 2 large rooms on each floor, was located in the Quakers' Negro School Building on 6th and State Streets, and was staffed at first with white teachers. In the spring of 1869, Charlotte Andrews, just 15, was hired to fill out the term of one of the white teachers. Thus, she became the first Negro teacher in the Little Rock public school system. She was hired permanently the next year, along with 3 other Negro teachers. Andrews' resolve to become a teacher resulted from the influence of her missionary teachers. Her love for teaching and passion for learning prompted her to take a leave after her first year of teaching. She had saved enough money for 1 year of college and went to attend Oberlin College, one of the few schools at the time to accept Negro students. Charlotte Andrews became the first black woman from the state of Arkansas to go to college. She was partially enrolled in the literary course, studying Latin, geometry, ancient history, evidence of Christianity, biblical antiquities, elocution, and rhetoric, and at the Conservatory of Music, though for just over 2 years. Although she returned to Little Rock periodically to earn money teaching at Union School, Oberlin was really beyond her means financially. Finally, in 1873, she abandoned any hopes of a college degree and returned to Little Rock permanently to teach in the city's black public schools. She married John Herbert Stevens, a carpenter, in 1877, and together they had 6 children, 2 of whom died in infancy. For 26 years, from 1869 to 1896, she taught grade school, all subjects and all classes. Stevens had her hands full teaching in her overcrowded classroom. At one time, she had as many as 90 students in her classroom. Still, she was an excellent teacher, and she was an overwhelmingly positive influence on her students. She was always fair-minded, and she recognized the worth and dignity of the individual, whether he was a little Negro beginner or a white supervisor. A white reporter once said, "Her diction is that of a person of highest culture and refinement, and one need only to converse with her for a few minutes to become aware of her keen, trained intellect, and to realize that here is one of the outstanding women of the Negro race." Further, she had this ability to cross over racial lines with her understanding and sympathies. Always she taught her people to strive for better things. Beatrice enjoyed school, and she took her studies seriously. Her classes, adapted for the black children from a typical New England classical program for white children, included reading, spelling, writing, grammar, diction, history, geography, arithmetic, and music. Beatrice advanced to high school, where she continued to excel. She was one of 200 students enrolled at Union School, which had expanded in 1876, 9 years after the school opened, to include a junior and senior high. The fact that Beatrice had a public high school to attend is significant. Most Southern whites did not believe that higher education was necessary for black children, so states provided little or no funds for their instruction. The 1896 Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, allowed for racial segregation only if the facilities in public institutions were equal, but in the opinion of Supreme Court Justice John Marshall Harlan, equal facilities for both black and white students would hurt white children without advancing blacks. County school boards, in violation of the separate but equal ruling of the Plessy case, could justify then their discriminatory behavior toward black children with inadequate facilities and substantially less pay for Negro teachers than white teachers. It meant also that Southern school boards did not have to offer public secondary education for black children, while proceeding with rigor to increase the number of high schools available to white children. With ever-increasing enrollment and the need for more space, black school officials and community leaders urged the city to improve the Union School facilities. Finally, in 1902, the school was moved and its name changed to Capitol Hill after its new location. Capitol Hill School was an old-fashioned framed red brick school building of moderate size. The school environment, surrounded by rocks and trees, was pleasant enough. It even had rough benches outside, built for the children to use during lunch hour. Although it was a new building, Capitol Hill School had limited resources. Of utmost concern to the community was the fact that the school had no library. Carrie Still Shepperson, William Grant Still's mother, was dismayed by the continued lack of support for black children. She set about to organize an alumni group to put on several benefit performances of Shakespeare plays, which netted the school several $100s. With these funds, the Capitol Hill Library was founded. The high school was understaffed and under-equipped with books, but the teachers, many of whom were college graduates, did an excellent job of providing a solid education for the children. Among the faculty was Carrie Shepperson, who taught English in the high school department. From her, the students learned Chaucer and Shakespeare. Capitol Hill School emphasized a classical, liberal, or college preparatory curriculum. Accepting the philosophy of race leader W.E.B. Du Bois, community leaders felt that an academic program would provide a foundation for the best intellectual traditions and the best means to understanding their own historical development and sociological uniqueness. Through this educational system, blacks would understand their inherent rights to equality. At a time when industrial education was being promoted by Booker T. Washington, arguably the most influential black national leader, and others, as a more appropriate avenue for black children, black educators in Little Rock were adamant that classical objectives should be maintained. Industrial education was offered as an elective for boys. Stressing self-determination, the students in the industrial courses learned practical skills with which they could buy land and earn a living. The curriculum at Capitol Hill High School was demanding. Beatrice studied Greek and Latin. In addition, she studied 3 years of algebra, history, physics, and English. As electives, Beatrice chose cooking and sewing, courses that complemented her hobbies, painting china, knitting, and crocheting. Florence Price readied herself for college and a career as a music teacher and pianist. Although there is no extant evidence, it is likely that after her early training with her mother, Price studied piano with another local teacher, given her advanced technique by the time she entered college. Florence Beatrice was also an accomplished organist. Although Allison Presbyterian had only a piano, Price would have had access to the numerous organs in the city because of her parents' social and professional associations. Most likely she took lessons from a white organist at one of the local churches. Price graduated from high school at 14. Commencement Day 1902 was a great day for the young woman. She was chosen valedictorian of her class. Little did she know on that day that her alma mater, in 1930 renamed Dunbar High School and Junior College, would honor her 30 years later as one of its most distinguished early graduates. Little did she know that the Negro community would want to greet her when she returned in a way befitting a celebrity. There was even talk of a parade. Her return home would indeed be a day of celebration. Florence Beatrice stayed in Little Rock for 1 year after graduation from high school. She was accepted at New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, but would use this year to practice piano and organ and compose to ready herself for college. Perhaps because of her young age, her parents thought it best to wait before sending her so far away from home. Florence Beatrice was a young but independent girl of 15, and she would soon be ready to leave the South in pursuit of educational opportunities.